Eddie Carver had worked the night shift on the railroad for over 20 years. Freight trains, long and heavy, rolled across the Midwest under his watch. Steel, smoke, and silence. That was his life. But there was always one stretch of track he hated. Mile marker 41. The men on his crew called it the Hollow Mile. The woods pressed too close there, leaning over the rails like a dark mouth waiting to swallow. Fog pooled low, hugging the ballast stones. Even on summer nights, it carried a chill that sank into Eddie's bones. He'd lean out of his shack with his lantern, the light barely carving 10 feet into the mist. Some nights he swore the silence was too deep, like the world itself was holding its breath. Rumors clung to that stretch of track like moss on stone. Older men whispered of things pacing the trains, eyes in the timber, carcasses of deer, sometimes dogs, found torn to ribbons along the right-of-way. Eddie laughed it off in the daylight, but when the sun dipped and the whistle of a freight echoed through the valley, he wasn't laughing. His boots crunched against gravel. The smell of iron and diesel always hung thick here. But lately, another scent rode the wind. Coppery, sweet, like blood gone bad. His thermos of coffee tasted bitter, metallic almost. Nerves had a way of turning everything sour. By his fourth night in a row, he noticed how his hands trembled when he lit his cigarette. The paper burned unevenly. The smoke caught in his throat, acrid and sharp. He muttered to himself, "Just animals, just nerves." But deep down, he knew better. It was just past midnight when the call came crackling over the radio. A freight had reported hitting something large near the Hollow Mile. Eddie grabbed his lantern, the heavy iron handle slick with sweat. He stepped into the fog. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, each step echoing too loud in the night. The train sat motionless on the rails ahead, engines idling with a low rumble. The fog wrapped it in ghostly ribbons of white. Steel groaned as though the weight of the world pressed down on it. The conductor leaned out of his cab, his face pale, glistening with sweat. His voice shook. "Animal," he said. "Big, but it got back up." Eddie frowned. He raised his lantern. The rails ahead gleamed wet under the fog-like glow, and then he saw it. Deep gouges, claw marks, carved into solid steel. Eddie crouched, his fingers hovering an inch above the grooves. Still warm, the metal trembled faintly, as if remembering. His throat tightened. He lifted his eyes to the tree line, and that's when he saw them. Two orbs, yellow, reflective, watching. Too high to be a deer, too far apart to be a bear. They blinked once, and then another set joined them, and another. The air thickened. The stench hit him, rotten fur, coppery blood, like a slaughterhouse floor left to stew in the heat. Eddie gagged, bile rising at the back of his tongue. The fog muffled sound, but a low growl wove through it. So low he felt it vibrate in his ribs before he heard it. His lantern shook in his hand. The shadows moved. The engineer shouted from the cab, "Throttle up! Go! Go!" The engines roared, pistons screaming. The freight shuddered forward, wheels grinding sparks. Eddie stood frozen by the shack until the fog split. Shapes burst from the trees, tall, broad, bent forward on two legs. Dogman. They hit the rails with a thunder of claws, not running like animals, but pacing like predators. Their strides were effortless, matching the freight's acceleration. Eddie's lantern swung wildly as his knees gave. The glow cut across their fur, matted and black with rain. Muzzles long, jaws open wide to reveal jagged teeth slick with saliva. One slammed a claw against a boxcar. Steel crumpled inward with a deafening bang. Sparks showered the night. The smell of hot iron mixed with the stench of wet dog and gore. Another howled, not like a wolf. This was deeper, richer, a sound that made the rails themselves tremble. The howl sank into Eddie's chest and rattled his bones. The creature's claws struck sparks off the rails as they kept pace. Eyes burning, teeth snapping. Every impact felt closer, closer, closer. Eddie stumbled backward into the shack. The lantern clanged against the desk, spilling oil. Flames licked the rim before sputtering out in the damp. He pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass. His own reflection stared back, pale, hollow-eyed. And beyond it, shapes pacing steel like it was nothing. The conductor's scream tore through the radio. "They're on the cars! They're on us!" Eddie spun, grabbing the receiver. Static, screams, the sound of steel tearing. He looked through the fog, squinting. The train lurched, slowed, screeched, and then he saw it. A Dogman stood in the middle of the tracks, broad, massive, shoulders wider than the rails themselves, eyes blazing yellow. The freight hit it head-on. The night exploded with sound, screeching wheels, shrieking metal, sparks flying in fountains of light. Eddie covered his face as fire rained from steel, but the creature did not fall. It bent, it dug its claws into the rails, and it dragged. The train screamed, bucked, fought, but the Dogman slowed it, stopped it, one impossible inch at a time. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, and then the claws started again, scraping, climbing, boxcar by boxcar. The engineer's light swept across the roofs. Shadows hunched and moved, claws curling into steel. Muzzles snapped through shattered glass. Windows exploded, spraying shards into the fog. The men screamed. One voice cut short with a gurgling cry. Eddie collapsed to his knees, hands clamped to his ears. Every scrape was a blade across his nerves. Every howl filled his mouth with the taste of pennies and bile. The shack rattled as something slammed against it. The smell of rot seeped through the cracks, filling his lungs. And then, at his window, a face. Wolf, but not wolf. Eyes glowing, muzzle steaming with hot breath. It pressed its nose to the glass, snarled, and grinned. Eddie sobbed silently in the corner. The lock rattled. Claws dragged long, slow lines down the siding. He prayed, he begged, but nothing answered. By dawn, mile marker 41 was a graveyard. Boxcars dented, rails scarred deep, gouged by claws no man could make. The ground littered with splinters of wood, shards of glass, streaks of blood that led nowhere. But no bodies, no fur, no proof. Only the silence of men too afraid to speak the truth. The railroad report read, mechanical failure, obstruction on track, routine incident. Eddie signed his name at the bottom. His hand shook so hard the letters bled across the page. He quit a week later, took work at a lumberyard. Safe, simple, no rails, no fog. But the nights never left him. Sometimes in the small hours he'd wake in sweat, the taste of iron in his mouth, the smell of rot in his nose, his ears ringing with the echo of claws against steel. And once, just once, he swore he heard it. The faint hum of rails underfoot, the scrape of claws keeping pace. Out there in the hollow mile, the Dogman still watched, still waited. Still ran alongside the trains, and he knew they always would.